Okay, good afternoon. Thank you so much for your help there, just technical problems. Right, what I'd like to do is something slightly different. Obviously, we've been listening to some very careful, nuanced discussions about the Muslims of Europe, or actually, I think I would very much agree with Musa's alteration of the description. I think we really do need to move on the language when we're really talking about European Muslims, whether we like it or not. And that's not to say that some Muslims do not consider themselves European, but generally, I mean, certainly in the UK, where I'm from, the debate around self-definition has pretty much been settled. People of various religious and theological and political persuasions describe themselves as British Muslims, barring one or two small insignificant voices who still talk about themselves as being Muslims in Britain. So what I'd like to do is move away from the dominant framing of Muslim young people in this whole kind of problem-centered kind of representation. And we know very well, and I don't need to go through the negatives. It's very much, I think, a kind of a common perception, a default, if you like. When we talk about Muslims, we're talking about the lower dregs of society, those who are segregated, who are disintegrated, who are social underachievers, and who are, involved in antisocial behavior, crime, etc., etc., etc. And we have all these stereotypes. They are religiously conservative, they are radicalized, or they're whatever. I mean, I think we've covered that territory. That's not to say there are real problems. And in the UK, it's not all rosy and wonderful. And we have our challenges. We have a very diverse community. And I will mention a little bit more about that. If you are looking from the outside in, looking at Muslim communities in Britain, just through the news media, newspapers, these are the kind of images which we are most often kind of exposed to: the angry, religious, veiled, unhappy, and very, very much out of place, really, in their societies. I mean, this is if you Google British Muslims or young Muslims in Britain, half of the image you find on Google will be like this. And it's unfortunate because they don't represent the majority of people's lives and experiences. They don't. And this distorting effect has a real serious impact in the way, first and foremost, the wider society perceives Muslims, and in the way it can have an internalizing effect as well amongst the young people themselves. What I want to suggest is that, and through my own kind of research interest, is that and work, is that most young Muslims are just young and ordinary. I mean, their lives and experiences, interests, aspirations, fears and hopes are not very much different from their non-Muslim peers and friends. Their experiences are very much similar, and obviously there are some distinct, unique experiences as a result of their Muslimness. But if you really want to get to know young people from Muslim backgrounds, you will find that actually what defines them is their youth, the fact of being young and what that means. And I'd like to think most of us remember what it was like. Yeah, we were all young once. And so there is an emerging literature now, which really, I'm happy to say, is moving away from these kind of very narrow, kind of superficial, kind of examinations of the experience, and looking at young people in the totality of their lives, and not necessarily media headlines. And these are some of the more well-known studies. And there are many monographs and good studies really of this, and to demonstrate this complexity and this diversity. Yes, there are still issues around socioeconomic deprivation. There is a real issue around discrimination. Racism is still very much alive. Islamophobia is very much on the increase as well. But if we are to understand young British Muslims today purely through those negative frames, we are really missing the bigger picture and the very rich, diverse experiences which I want to kind of just highlight. It's one or two examples. The reason for that is people are, you know, a lot of, in my view, a lot of the studies in the academic, even, you know, even until very recently, are very much, I would say, out of step with what is going on in communities. We are now in the UK into our third, arguably fourth generation. So things have moved on so much from the people who were born and or raised in the 1970s and 80s. A lot of the literature doesn't really reflect that significant change that's happened in the last 15 years or so. Even the last 5 years, there's been huge transformations within communities, and these are the result of the demographics. Even though British Muslim communities are predominantly South Asian, it's changing very rapidly. It's increasing. It's around 3 million. And with that, you have a second generation that is educated now. You have a large educated professional class who has acculturated and indigenized themselves to Britain. They have British tastes, whatever that means. This idea of Britishness obviously is contested. But you know, their tastes, their sense of humour, a lot of their values are infused with a particular British flavour. And that's created, and this is my argument, that it's created very British forms of religious and secular youth culture. While my interest has been mainly looking at the religious forms, there are many very secular forms of culture, lifestyle choices, which I haven't really paid much attention to in this presentation, but I just want to say that, you know, it's very much an unexplored, very rich potential area for future research, those of you who are interested. And so, at the moment, Muslim communities are still very much feeling the repercussions of the 9/11 attacks. Even though it's 14 years onwards, the political climate has changed, and even though it's been 10 years, young people who fall into that teenager bracket, you know, people in their mid-teens to early 20s, have very much grown up in the shadow of the 7/7 terror, the London bombings, the terrorist bombings, and the anti-terror discourse very much shapes their lives. And it's actually quite remarkable that I can actually talk about positive examples. People have got on with their lives and are trying to be young, normal and Muslim despite that, and it is a very difficult time. But relatively, I mean, the Brits have certain advantages and maybe social capital which makes them slightly different, and they've very much taken advantage of the digital social media opportunities out there. This has resulted in a very kind of radical transformation and transition from their parents' generation. It's resulted in multiple, you know, huge number of different positions, outlooks, different forms of religious authority and eclectic forms of individualized religious piety. But it's also resulted in, certainly as a result of the anti-terrorist, counter-terrorism, politicized environment, Muslim communities have started to fragment politically for positioning, and there is a very real politics of representation taking place at the moment, which is both external and internal, and fueled really by the government's narrowing in their interest into Muslims they can work with and Muslims that they are, you know, worried about. And so that has an effect of politicizing people further, and as well as new forms of religious activism. Just a few I mean, this slide is almost unnecessary, really. The population is very young. It's around 50% is under the age of 24, and it's growing. And as I say, the diversity is multiply fractured around culture, class, politics, gender, etc. The usual dynamics, really. And I'm saying that because I don't want people to go away thinking, well, I've presented a very simplified version of what is going on the ground. I want to present what is perhaps a general trend. And see, these images are kind of more reflective, and they're not the only ones, but they are more the everyday experiences and kind of the scenes and visual kind of examples of what you will see when if you go to the UK. You know, this is what the kind of diverse manifestations of youth identity that you'll find. You know, now, just to give some quick examples, there are I mean, over the last 10 to 15 years, because of this social confidence and sense of feeling at home, we have an emergence of a number of what I'm saying is a cultural, an invisible Muslim. What I mean by that is the Muslims that we don't know about, that we don't talk about, that we actually can, in a sense, we're ignoring the fact that most Muslims have anchored their identities and their futures in Britain, and that's it. There is no myth of return for them. They are British, they are here to stay, and they are contributing to British society, and they're contributing in a number of ways in the civil sector, civil society sector, the voluntary sector, as well as formal politics as well. You have people who are, and I just wanted to show you a couple of just a couple of the images from, I mean, one of the most prominent organizations is the City Circle organization, which has really pioneered this idea of encouraging public debate, and it's a platform, it's a weekly platform that brings together Muslims of all backgrounds and persuasions to highlight what is going on in communities. It becomes a discussion forum, a place for debate, but the fact is that it's an open forum where you have people from different faiths coming as well, and I think this is really important. Aside from the education work that they do, it's a campaigning group as well, and it's really provided a model that's been replicated across the UK in terms of this engagement with wider societies, and not kind of looking inward in communities, but looking outwards and what British Muslims can do and say about what is going on in their society. In terms of the arts, I mean, again, there's a huge unknown, invisible artistic scene, and this website is worth checking out if people are interested. It's the British Muslim Museum Initiative, and there you have a very, very interesting resource of what is actually going on in the ground. You have numerous artists doing all sorts of, you know, choreographers, calligraphers, sculptors, novelists, playwrights, etc., etc. This is the invisible Muslims I'm talking about. These are the people who are actually working on the ground and who are co-creating a distinct British Muslim identity. I mean, these are the Muslims you don't hear about, and this is my point. And what I'm trying to say is that these are the Muslims who are shaping what it means to be a British Muslim today. Now, just to finish off, I want to show you a video which, again, hopefully some of you have already seen, but it really captures this kind of vibrant. It might seem crazy. I don't know if anybody's seen this already. It's been imitated. So we did it first. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along.
happiness is to you. Because clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. The love is too high. Bring me down, can't none.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to have to leave you there. We're running out of time, but if you want the video, and it's up there on YouTube, and yeah, it's had over 2 million views, and I think it's inspired other people to produce their own versions. And so I think it is indicative of a trend that we are seeing, where people are just really expressing themselves, you know, naturally, organically. This is what's happening. And those of us who, you know, either work with these communities, research these communities, or live in these communities, we know this already. This is what's happening. And I suppose this is really important, that the wider society need to become aware of this. And it is starting to get picked up in the mainstream media. You might see the odd occasional documentary, but as I would still argue that this is very much the invisible Muslim experience that really needs to become more visible. And I think there are examples, and lots of examples of positive good practice, and something that policymakers could benefit from looking into further. And just as a footnote, this video itself created debate. Very interesting kind of fallout from this video. There were other Muslims who contested it, and it wasn't necessarily strict conservative Muslims. There was an internal critique, but that's a different story. But thank you for your attention.